I got home early that evening, earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but something felt off. You know that strange electric tension in the air before a thunderstorm? That's how it felt. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, it's waiting. Linda's car was in the driveway, which meant she was home. I expected to hear the TV in the background or the sound of her talking on the phone, maybe even humming while she cooked. She always hummed when she was in the kitchen. But there was nothing. Just the dull hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the living room clock. I walked into the hallway, and that's when I noticed it. Her purse, keys, and shoes were scattered near the front door, as if she had come in a hurry. That wasn't like her. Linda was the kind of person who placed things exactly where they belonged. Purse on the hook, keys in the bowl, shoes lined up neatly by the wall. But today they were dropped carelessly, like an afterthought. I called out her name. No answer. The bedroom door was shut. Something clenched in my stomach. The door was never shut during the day unless one of us was changing. But she wasn't changing. I knew it. I felt it. I stepped forward, hand hovering over the doorknob. I hesitated for a second, an irrational part of me screaming that I should just walk away, go sit on the couch, turn on the TV, and pretend I never noticed anything strange. But I wasn't that guy. Not anymore. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. Linda stood near the bed, her back to me. She was in a bathrobe, and her hair was damp like she had just taken a shower. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the way she jumped when she heard the door open, her entire body flinching like a guilty child caught sneaking candy. Her hands clutched at the robe, tightening it around herself, and when she turned, her smile was too quick, too forced. "Hey, you're home early," she said. Voice just a little too high, a little too bright. I said nothing. My eyes swept the room, scanning for something, anything that explained the strange tension pressing down on my chest. The bed was made, everything in its place. Nothing looked suspicious. But that was the problem. Everything looked too perfect. Linda was always neat, but this was different. The pillows were arranged exactly as they should be. The blanket was smooth, no creases, no sign of anyone having sat on it, let alone laid down. The air smelled like lavender body wash, but it was too strong, like she had scrubbed herself raw in the shower. And then I saw it. A belt. Not mine. Black leather, lying on the floor near the edge of the closet. A man's belt. I didn't look at her. I just bent down slowly and picked it up. The second my fingers wrapped around the cool leather, I heard her suck in a sharp breath. "Whose is this?" I asked, holding it up. Silence. Then, too quickly, "Oh, that it's old. I found it in the closet while I was cleaning. Probably yours from years ago." Lie. A bad one. I knew every belt I owned. And this one? This one wasn't mine. The leather was different, the buckle was different. It didn't smell like me. I turned the belt over in my hands. There was a faint, embossed logo near the tip, a designer brand I would never wear. I lifted my gaze, finally meeting her eyes. Linda knew. She knew I didn't believe her. But instead of backing down, she crossed her arms and gave me that look, the one she always gave when she was about to double down on a lie. "Oh, for God's sake, Mike. You're being ridiculous," she huffed, rolling her eyes. "It's just a belt. I don't even know where it came from. But I saw it." The tiniest flicker of panic behind her bravado. And in that moment, something in me shifted. I had spent years trusting her, believing in us. But this wasn't just a careless mistake. This wasn't forgetfulness or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if the woman standing in front of me was my wife, or a stranger I had been sleeping beside for the past 30 years. I didn't move, didn't blink, just held the belt between us like it was a loaded gun, waiting to see if she'd flinch again. Linda didn't. She held her ground, arms crossed, chin tilted up, that sharp glint in her eye telling me she was ready for battle. But she wasn't as good at hiding things as she thought. The slight tremor in her fingers, the way she kept shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She was nervous. And she had every damn reason to be. I took a slow step forward, watching her. She didn't move, but I saw her throat bob as she swallowed. "Try again," I said, voice calm, controlled. "Because we both know this isn't mine." She let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was wrong, too forced, too brittle. "Jesus, Mike. You're acting like a detective over a stupid belt." I stayed quiet. "Fine," she snapped, throwing up her hands. "Maybe it's from one of the kids. Maybe Jason left it here last time he visited. Jason, our son." The one who lived 3 states away and hadn't been home in over a year. I let that sit in the air between us. Linda knew she had screwed up the second the words left her mouth. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, her lips twisting into something almost smug. "You're being paranoid," she said, shaking her head. "Honestly, this is embarrassing. You're standing here, acting like some jealous husband in a bad movie, accusing me of—" "What, exactly?" She was trying to make me feel ridiculous, trying to flip this on me like I was the crazy one. I had spent 30 years with this woman. I knew every expression, every tactic, every deflection she used when she wanted to avoid something. And right now, she was scrambling. I took another step toward her, closing the space between us. Linda held her ground, but I saw it. The way her body tensed, her breathing shallowed. I wasn't going to let this go. "Say it," I said, voice low. "Say what you think I'm accusing you of." She hesitated just for a second. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she caught herself. Then she scoffed. "Infidelity?" she said, the word dripping with mockery. "You think I'm cheating on you, Mike?" I tilted my head slightly, waiting, watching. She laughed again, louder this time. "Wow, just wow. I can't believe this. 30 years of marriage? And you think I'd throw it all away for some random guy?" Not random, I thought, because suddenly I knew. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't some reckless mistake. This was something bigger. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late nights. The sudden interest in the gym. The phone she never left unattended anymore. The way she had started dressing differently, trading in her comfortable clothes for something tighter, younger, not for me. And now this belt. A belt that wasn't mine. A belt that belonged to him. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice steady. Her eyes darkened. "There is no one." "You really think I'd cheat?" she said, stepping closer, her face inches from mine. I could smell the lavender from her shower, the sharp, artificial scent of freshly scrubbed guilt. "After everything we've built together? Do you even hear yourself right now?" I heard myself perfectly, and I heard her too. The desperation in her voice, the sharp edge to her words. She wasn't denying it because she was innocent. She was denying it because she was cornered. I watched her for a long moment, taking in the woman I had loved for 3 decades. The woman I had trusted, respected, built a life with. I didn't recognize her, but I recognized the game she was playing. And I wasn't playing anymore. Slowly, deliberately, I held up the belt. Then I dropped it at her feet. The slap of leather against hardwood echoed in the silence between us. Her breath hitched. I stepped back, nodding once. "All right," I said quietly, "if that's how you want to play it." Then I turned and walked out of the room. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't care if she followed. I didn't go far. Just down the hall into the kitchen, where I leaned against the counter and tried to swallow the rage clawing its way up my throat. My hands weren't shaking. My breath was steady. But inside I was a storm. She thought she was smart. Thought she could stand there, lie straight to my face and win. But this wasn't a fight she could win. Because I knew. I heard the bedroom door creak open behind me. Soft footsteps moving cautiously down the hall. Linda was coming. Probably thinking about her next move. How to twist this. How to make me feel guilty for even suspecting her. She stepped into the kitchen, hesitating when she saw me standing there, arms crossed, waiting. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a little softer now, trying a different tactic. Less defensive, more concerned. Like I was the problem. I didn't answer. Just looked at her. She sighed, shaking her head. "Mike, I don't know why you're acting like this. It's a belt." "A belt? Do you really want to throw away everything we have over something this stupid?" "Throw away?" She was talking like I was the one ruining things. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm not the one throwing anything away, Linda." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "So what? You're just going to sulk now? Give me the silent treatment? That's mature." I pushed off the counter, stepping toward her. She went rigid for a second, like she thought I was going to do something, but I just brushed past her, heading for the table. My phone was sitting there, screen still lit from the call I'd been on before I got home. The call that ended earlier than expected. I picked it up, tapped the screen a few times, and turned back to her. She was watching me now, arms still crossed, impatience flickering behind her eyes. What are you doing? I held up the phone. Checking the cameras. Her face barely changed. Barely. But it was there. That flicker of panic. She recovered fast. The what? The security cameras, I said evenly. The ones I installed last year, remember? You said they were a waste of money. A heartbeat of silence. Then she scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, for God's sake, Mike. You really think I'm stupid enough to bring another man into our house? Yes. I didn't say it out loud. Didn't have to. She was unraveling. I could see it. Feel it. The tightness in her posture. The way she kept licking her lips. The dart of her eyes toward the phone in my hand. She was waiting. Waiting to see if I was bluffing. I wasn't. I tapped a few more times, scrolling through the footage, knowing exactly what time I needed to check. I had come home early. Unexpectedly. She hadn't been expecting me. And that belt sure as hell didn't fall onto the floor by itself. I found the clip. Hit play. Turned the screen toward her. For the first time since this started, Linda went completely still. The footage wasn't crystal clear, it was angled toward the driveway mostly to catch anyone coming up to the house. But it was enough. More than enough. A car pulling up. Not mine. A man stepping out. Tall. Dark-haired. Wearing a suit. Walking up to our front door. Disappearing inside. I looked up at her. Her face had gone pale. You want to tell me who that is? I asked, voice deceptively calm. She opened her mouth, closed it. I waited. Then, just like that, she snapped. Oh my God, Mike. Do you hear yourself? She practically shouted, throwing her hands in the air. You're acting like a paranoid psycho. This is insane. I held up the phone again, shaking it slightly. What's insane is you still standing here, lying to my face, when the proof is right here. Linda's eyes burned into mine. And then, just like that, her entire expression shifted. The panic melted away. The outrage vanished. And in its place? Cold, calculated indifference. She took a slow breath, tilting her head slightly. And when she spoke next, her voice was different. Lower. Smoother. All right, she said. You want the truth? I didn't answer. She smiled. Not a real smile. A smirk. It's my freedom, Mike. The words hit harder than I expected. She folded her arms, shifting her weight, looking me up and down like I was some clueless idiot she'd been tolerating for far too long. That's what this is. My freedom. And yeah, maybe I wanted something more. Something different. Can you blame me? She was baiting me. Trying to get a reaction. I didn't give her one. Her smirk widened slightly. God, you really don't get it, do you? She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. You've been so wrapped up in your little routine, your boring little life, you didn't even notice when I stopped caring. A slow exhale left my lungs. I let her talk. Let her dig herself deeper. 30 years, Mike. She continued, her voice lilting, mocking. 30 years of the same conversations, the same dinners, the same everything. And you really thought I was happy. I just watched her. Linda laughed again, stepping closer. You know what's funny? You standing here, acting all shocked. Like this just came out of nowhere. Newsflash. It didn't. I've been done for a long time. She was lying. Not about the affair. Not about wanting more. But about being done. If she was really done, she would have left. But she hadn't. Because she still thought she could win. I let a long silence stretch between us, then pocketed my phone. Her eyes flicked toward it, and for the first time I saw it, uncertainty. I nodded slowly, stepping past her. Her voice followed me. Where are you going? I didn't answer. She tried again. Oh, come on, Mike. What, are you gonna pout now? Give me the cold shoulder? Still, I said nothing. And as I reached the door, something shifted in her voice. Softer. Uneasy. Mike. I turned my head slightly, met her gaze, and I said the one thing I knew she wasn't expecting. You want freedom? I murmured. I let a beat pass. Let the weight of the words settle between us. Then I nodded. Fine. You got it. And I walked out. I didn't stop walking until I was outside. The cool evening air hitting my face like a slap. The sky was darkening, streaked with the last hints of daylight bleeding into the horizon. I stood there for a second, hands on my hips, exhaling slowly. I wasn't angry, not in the way I should have been, not in the explosive, shouting, throwing things across the room way. No, this was something different, colder, sharper, a kind of clarity that cut through the noise. Linda had just confessed, not in an apologetic, regretful way, not with guilt or shame, or even an ounce of respect for the years we had spent together. She had mocked me, stood there, looked me in the eye, and practically laughed at the life we had built like it was some kind of joke. She thought she had one. But she didn't realize the game had just changed. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the contacts. There were a dozen people I could have called friends, family, my son Jason. But I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't something to announce over the phone. This was something I needed to handle my way. I scrolled down until I found the name I was looking for. Eric. My lawyer. I tapped the call button and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before he picked up. Mike. His voice was calm, familiar. Everything all right? I glanced back at the house. The lights in the kitchen were still on, and through the window I could see Linda pacing. She had her arms crossed, her mouth pressed into a thin line. She was waiting for me to come back in. Waiting for me to do what I always did, compromise. Not this time. I need to start the process, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. A short pause. Then Eric exhaled. Divorce. Yeah. All right. He didn't ask questions. We had talked before, months ago, when I first started noticing the little things. Back then, I hadn't been ready. Hadn't wanted to believe it. Now, there was no doubt left. I'll get the paperwork started, Eric said. You sure you don't want to wait? Cool off? I let out a quiet laugh. I'm the calmest I've been in years. Another pause. Then, good. We talked for a few more minutes, and by the time I hung up, something in me had shifted. This was it. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more chasing after someone who had already left me behind. I turned back toward the house and walked inside. Linda was still in the kitchen, her arms still crossed. But her expression had changed. She looked more hesitant now, like she had expected me to storm back in, demand answers, start a fight. Instead, I just walked past her, heading toward the bedroom. Mike, she called after me. I didn't answer. I went straight to the closet, grabbed a duffel bag, and started packing. I heard her footsteps behind me. What are you doing? I didn't stop. Just grabbed shirts, jeans, my shaving kit. Linda stepped closer. Mike, seriously, what are you doing? I zipped up the bag and finally looked at her. I'm leaving. Her eyes widened. Just for a second. Leaving? She echoed. Like the word itself didn't make sense. You wanted freedom, I said simply. You got it. Something flickered across her face. Shock, quickly masked by indifference. She folded her arms again, shifting her weight. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. I almost laughed. Dramatic? I stepped past her, heading for the door, and that's when she snapped. Mike, she said, her voice sharper now. You're really going to walk out over this? Over some stupid misunderstanding. I turned back. A misunderstanding? I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head. Linda, I caught you. I gave you every opportunity to come clean, and you still stood there, looking me in the eye and lied. She rolled her eyes, but I saw the way her jaw tightened. It wasn't serious. I let the words sink in. It wasn't serious. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of love, trust, sacrifice. And that was her defense? I exhaled slowly. You know what, Linda? I said. I don't care. I saw it then. Realization. That I was actually done. That this wasn't just a fight. That I wasn't going to come back in an hour, tail between my legs, ready to talk things through. Her posture stiffened. And where do you think you're going to go? I picked up my bag, slinging it over my shoulder. Doesn't matter, she scoffed. You're just going to leave me here? Walk out on everything we built. I shook my head. You walked out a long time ago, Linda. I turned toward the door, but her voice followed me. Fine, she snapped. Go. See how far you get without me. I paused, just for a second. Then I walked out. And this time I wasn't looking back. I drove. Not toward anything. Not with a destination in mind. Just forward, away from the house, away from her, letting the night swallow me whole. The sky had darkened completely by now, the glow of streetlights flickering past as I took turns without thinking, just following empty roads, the hum of the tires beneath me the only sound. I wasn't running. I wasn't lost. I was just done. Linda's words kept replaying in my head. The mockery in her voice. The indifference. The way she had stood there, not even trying to save what we had. Not even caring. 30 years. 3 decades. And to her, it was just boring. Just routine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, exhaling slowly through my nose. I could feel it now, that emptiness creeping in, slithering around my ribs, squeezing. A part of me had expected to feel more. To feel anger, grief, betrayal, something. But there was nothing. Just this dull, quiet finality. Like something inside me had already died a long time ago, and I was only now burying the body. The buzzing of my phone on the passenger seat pulled me out of my thoughts. I glanced down. Linda. I let it ring. It buzzed again. Another call. Then a text. Then another. I ignored them all. Eventually, the buzzing stopped, and silence filled the car again. I didn't stop driving until I saw the glowing neon sign of a motel on the side of the highway. The kind of place no one really chooses to stay at. Just a last resort for people passing through. It seemed fitting. I pulled in, parked, and grabbed my bag. The lobby was small, dimly lit, with a tired-looking woman behind the desk. She barely looked up as I handed over my ID and credit card, her fingers moving lazily across the keyboard. "How many nights?" she asked, voice flat. I hesitated. How many nights did a man need when his wife of 30 years had just destroyed everything? "Just one," I said finally. She slid a keycard across the counter without another word. The room was exactly what I expected. Stale air, outdated furniture, sheets that looked clean but didn't feel clean. A tiny TV bolted to the wall, a single lamp casting a yellowish glow over everything. I dropped my bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand down my face. And then, for the first time since I walked out that door, the weight of it hit me. This was real. I was really gone, and there was no going back. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. 30 years. 3 decades of building a life together, only to have it shattered in a single evening. And the worst part? She wasn't even sorry. I had loved her. Loved her when we were young and reckless, when we had nothing but each other. Loved her when we built our first home, when we had kids, when we navigated all the highs and lows of marriage. I had been loyal, steady, and she had laughed at that. I let out a slow breath, reaching for my phone. No new messages. No more calls. Good. I opened my contacts, scrolled down, and hovered over Jason's name. My son. Our son. How was I supposed to tell him? How do you call your grown child and tell them that the life they thought was stable, solid, real, had been a lie? That their mother had looked at 30 years of marriage and decided she was bored? I clenched my jaw and put the phone down. Not tonight. Not yet. Instead, I opened my messages and typed something else. Me, Eric, file the papers first thing in the morning. A few seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. Eric, understood. I'll have everything ready for you to sign. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. It was done. Linda had wanted freedom. She had just gotten it. And the price? Losing me. Forever. The motel room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner rattling slightly in the window. I sat there, staring at the wall, my mind running circles around itself. I had walked out. I had left. And Linda. Linda had let me go. No running after me. No begging me to stay. No tears, no apologies, no regret. The woman I had built a life with had looked me in the eyes and mocked me. She had stood there with her arms crossed, smirking like she had won some kind of twisted game. I had expected anger. Expected her to fight. Instead, she had just let it happen. I leaned back against the headboard, exhaling slowly. This should have hurt more. Should have torn me apart from the inside out. 30 years of marriage shouldn't end in a cheap motel with me feeling nothing. But maybe that was the real betrayal. Not just the affair, but the slow, quiet death of everything before it. How long had she been gone, really? How long had she been pretending? Had she ever even loved me at all? I scrubbed a hand down my face, shaking my head. I couldn't go down that road. Not now. My phone buzzed again. I sighed, expecting Linda's name to pop up again, but it wasn't her. Jason. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Hey, kid, I said, keeping my voice steady. Dad, he said immediately. What's going on? Mom just called me. I closed my eyes for a second. Of course she did. I should have known she'd try to get ahead of this. What did she say? I asked. Jason hesitated. She was off. I don't know. Said you ran off after an argument. That you were acting crazy. I almost laughed. Crazy. That was the word she had chosen. Not heartbroken. Not betrayed. Just crazy. Figures. Jason continued. I didn't believe her, obviously. That's why I'm calling you. His voice was edged with something sharp concern. Worry. Doubt. I hated that. Hated that I had to have this conversation with my own son. I ran a hand through my hair, choosing my words carefully. Your mom and I. We're done, Jason. Silence. Then, done? What do you mean done? I swallowed. I mean I left. I mean we're getting divorced. Another silence. Longer this time. I could feel him processing it, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense at all. Why? I let out a slow breath. This was it. I had to say it. Had to rip off the bandage and lay it all out. She cheated, Jason. My voice was quiet. Matter of fact. For who knows how long. And tonight she made it clear she doesn't regret it. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Jason didn't speak. I could hear his breathing through the phone, uneven, sharp. Dad. His voice cracked. Are you serious? Yeah. A long, slow exhale. Then a quiet, shaky Jesus Christ. I shut my eyes. I knew how much this would hurt him. I hated that I was the one saying it. Jason was a grown man now, living his own life, but this would still wreck him. I'm sorry, I said, even though it wasn't my apology to give. Jason let out a short, bitter laugh. Why the hell are you apologizing? Because that's what I did. Even now. Even after all of it. Jason was silent again. Then, finally, where are you? A motel, I admitted. Needed space. Another pause. Then, I'm coming. I frowned. Jay, you don't have to. I'm coming, he repeated, firmer this time. You shouldn't be alone right now. I swallowed hard. There was no arguing with him. He had always been stubborn, just like me. All right, I said quietly. We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Linda had called Jason to control the narrative. She had painted herself as the victim, twisting the story before I even had a chance to tell the truth. But the thing about truth, it always comes out. And when Jason walked through that motel door, I was going to make damn sure he knew all of it. Jason showed up faster than I expected. It had been less than an hour since we hung up, and already, I heard the low rumble of his car pulling into the motel lot. I sat up, rubbing a hand over my face, trying to push away the exhaustion sinking into my bones. This wasn't how I wanted to see my son. Not like this. Not in some half-lit, cigarette-smelling motel room, with my bag sitting by the door like a stranger passing through. But this was where we were. A sharp knock on the door. 3 times. Quick. Urgent. I stood, crossing the room, and opened it. Jason stepped inside, eyes scanning the room before landing on me. He looked like he had just rolled out of bed. Sweatpants, an old hoodie, hair a mess. But his face was tight, jaw clenched like he was barely keeping it together. Hey, Dad, he said, voice rough. I nodded once. Come in. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him, but neither of us sat. We just stood there, the air between us thick with things unsaid. Finally, Jason exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. Okay, he said. Tell me. I leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. Tell you what? Jason shot me a look. Everything. So I did. I told him about the belt, the security footage, the way Linda stood there and mocked me like I was a fool for ever believing in our marriage. I told him how I had packed my bag while she rolled her eyes, how she told me I was being dramatic and acted like I was the problem. Jason listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, just stood there, arms crossed, his face getting harder and harder with every word. By the time I finished, his hands were balled into fists at his sides. His jaw was so tight I thought his teeth might break. Mom, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. I sighed. Yeah. Jason let out a sharp, bitter laugh. I mean, I always knew she could be difficult, but this? He gestured vaguely. This is something else. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Jason shook his head again, pacing the small space. He was angry, but not the kind of anger that explodes. No, this was something colder. Something that lasts. Then suddenly he stopped and turned to me. You said she didn't even apologize? I let out a dry chuckle. Nope. Didn't try to stop you? Not once. Jason's eyes darkened. He took a slow, deep breath, and I could see it happening the moment he stopped seeing Linda as just his mom and started seeing her for what she really was. A liar. A cheater. A woman who threw away 30 years of marriage like it was nothing. Jason swallowed hard. I should have seen it, he muttered. I frowned. What do you mean? He hesitated. Just for a second. Then, quietly, he said, she changed, Dad. A while ago. I stared at him. What? Jason exhaled, shaking his head. I didn't think much of it at the time, but she was different. Last time I visited, she was weirdly distant. Kept looking at her phone, going out more than usual. And she wasn't really asking about you, you know? She used to always ask how you were, what you were working on, that kind of stuff. But this time, he looked up at me. She didn't mention you at all. My stomach twisted. Jason saw it before I did. He felt it. And I had been too blind, too trusting to notice. Jason clenched his jaw. I just thought maybe she was in a mood or something. But now I'm realizing she was already gone. I let out a slow breath, rubbing my temple. It was one thing to know she had checked out of our marriage. Another thing entirely to realize my own son had sensed it before I did. Silence settled between us, heavy and thick. Then Jason scoffed. And she had the nerve to call me and act like you'd lost your mind? I looked at him sharply. What exactly did she say? Jason rolled his eyes, voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, Jason, your father's acting completely irrational. He just left in the middle of the night. I don't know what's gotten into him. He shook his head. Like she wasn't the reason you walked out. I shouldn't have been surprised. Of course she'd paint herself as the victim. Of course she'd try to turn Jason against me. But she had miscalculated. Jason wasn't stupid. And he sure as hell wasn't on her side. He let out a sharp breath. I need a drink. I almost laughed. Join the club. Jason sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, running a hand over his face. So what now? Now I had a lawyer filing papers first thing in the morning. Now I had to untangle 30 years of marriage from my entire life. Now I had to rebuild from the ground up. But first I had to say the words out loud. She's done, I said simply. And so am I. Jason looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. And just like that, everything changed. Jason stayed the night. Not because I asked him to, but because he wasn't about to leave me sitting alone in a motel room after what had just happened. I didn't argue. We didn't talk much after that first conversation. There was nothing left to say, really. We both knew what had happened. We both knew what needed to happen next. At some point, Jason pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages, his mouth set in a grim line. I knew who he was looking for. Finally, he sighed. She hasn't texted me again. I wasn't surprised. Linda had tried to get ahead of the story, tried to turn Jason against me before I could even tell him the truth. But now that she knew he wasn't on her side, now that she knew he had chosen me, she had nothing to say. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. She's giving you space. Letting you cool off. Jason scoffed. Yeah? Well, she's in for a hell of a surprise. I didn't have to ask what he meant. Jason wasn't cooling off. Jason was done. And for the first time since I walked out of that house, I felt it, the weight of what Linda had really lost. She thought she was only losing me. She had no idea she was losing him, too. Jason tossed his phone onto the nightstand, rubbing his face tiredly. I still can't believe it, he muttered. I didn't answer. Because I could. I could believe it now. Because when I looked back, really looked back, I saw all the little cracks that had been forming for years. The distance. The small lies. The way she stopped looking at me like I mattered. It had all been leading here. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The night stretched on, but I barely slept. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment in painful detail. Linda, standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, unbothered. Linda, watching me pack my bag like it was some mild inconvenience. Linda, smirking as she told me she wanted freedom. And now she had it. The next morning, I woke early, if you could even call it waking up. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of restless thoughts until the sun started creeping through the curtains. Jason was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up when he heard me move. You good? I nodded, even though the answer was no. I sat up, grabbing my own phone, and immediately saw a notification. Eric, papers are ready. Let me know when you want to sign. I stared at the message for a long second before typing back, I'll be there in an hour. Jason watched me. That it? That's it. Jason nodded. Good. We packed up, checked out of the motel, and drove. Not back to the house. Not back to her. To my lawyer. To make this official. The office was in a quiet part of town, a small brick building with a single glass door that had Eric's name on it in simple, white lettering. I had been here before, months ago, when I first started to suspect. But back then, I hadn't been ready. Hadn't been sure. Yeah? Now, there was nothing left to question. Jason came in with me, but he stayed in the waiting area while I followed Eric into his office. He was already sitting behind his desk, paperwork neatly stacked in front of him. He gestured for me to sit. I won't waste your time, he said, sliding the papers toward me. Everything's ready. You just need to sign. I picked up the pen. My name was already printed at the bottom. All I had to do was write. I took a slow breath. This was it. 30 years reduced to a few pieces of paper. I signed. One line. Then another. And just like that, it was over. Eric took the papers, nodding. I'll get these filed today. She'll be served by the end of the week. I nodded. Good. There was nothing else to say. I stood, shook his hand, and walked out. Jason looked up as I stepped into the waiting room. Done. Done. He let out a slow breath. Damn. Yeah. Damn. We walked out of the office into the crisp morning air, and for the first time I realized I had nowhere to go. I didn't have a home anymore. Technically, the house was still mine, ours, but I wasn't going back. Jason must have seen something on my face because he clapped a hand on my shoulder. Come stay with me for a while. I hesitated. I don't want to, Dad, Jason said, cutting me off. Come stay with me. I exhaled slowly, then nodded. All right, because for the first time in a long time I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to fight to stay in a place I didn't belong anymore. Linda had made her choice. And now, I was making mine. Jason's apartment wasn't far. But the drive felt longer than it was. Maybe because my mind wasn't in the car. It was still back there. In the house I had left behind, in the past I had just signed away. Linda hadn't called again. Hadn't texted. Hadn't even tried. And wasn't that just the final proof? I had spent 30 years loving a woman who, in the end, couldn't even be bothered to fight for me. Jason pulled into his parking space, shutting off the engine. He didn't move right away, just sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Then he exhaled sharply. All right, he muttered. Let's get inside. I followed him up to the third floor. His place wasn't big, just a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was clean, quiet. A place that actually felt peaceful. No tension. No history lurking in the walls. Guest room's yours, Jason said, tossing his keys on the kitchen counter. It's not much, but it's got a bed. I nodded. Thanks, kid. Jason hesitated. Then finally he spoke. She's gonna call you, you know? I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. You think? Oh yeah. He let out a humorless laugh. She was probably expecting you to cool off and come crawling back by now. But since you didn't, he shook his head. She'll call. I wasn't so sure. Linda had made her priorities clear. And if there was one thing I knew about her, it was that she never looked back. But Jason was right about one thing: she wasn't expecting me to walk away for good. She thought she had control. That was always her thing: control. Control over our life. Control over the house. Control over me. And now? She had nothing. Jason clapped a hand on my shoulder. Look, Dad, I know this sucks. I know it's a mess. But you don't have to deal with it alone, all right? I nodded. I know. And for the first time, I actually meant it. The next morning, Jason had work. He hesitated before leaving, but I waved him off. I didn't need a babysitter. The second he was gone, I finally let myself breathe. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, debating if I should call Eric and check on the paperwork. Then, just as Jason predicted, it rang. Linda. I stared at the screen. She had waited. Let me stew for a full 24 hours before reaching out. Calculated. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I didn't speak first. I wanted to see what she had to say. Mike. Her voice was smooth, controlled. Like she hadn't just blown up our marriage. Like nothing had even happened. I said nothing. She sighed. Come on, Mike. Don't be childish. I almost laughed. Childish? She kept going. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is ridiculous. You just left. Didn't even talk things through. I finally spoke. Talk things through. Yes, she said, like I was the idiot. This whole thing got blown out of proportion. You need to come home so we can handle this like adults. I leaned back in the chair. Like adults. Exactly. I waited. Waited for her to say it. To apologize. To show even a single ounce of regret. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed like she was exhausted by my existence. You made your little point, Mike. Now come home so we can move forward. Move forward. Like I had just stormed off over something petty. Like I hadn't just caught her cheating. Like she hadn't stood there in our kitchen, smirking, telling me she wanted freedom. I exhaled slowly. Linda. Silence. Then finally she spoke. Yes. I'm not coming back. The silence that followed was long. And for the first time I heard it. Panic. You're being dramatic, she snapped. You really want to throw away 30 years over a stupid mistake? Wasn't a mistake. She scoffed. Oh, for God's sake, Mike, it was just, don't, I interrupted, my voice steady. Don't insult me. She went quiet. I could almost see her now, gripping the phone, running through her options. Trying to find the right thing to say to pull me back in. But she had already played her hand. She had already lost. You wanted freedom, I said simply. So I gave it to you. I let the words sink in. Then, before she could answer, I hung up. And for the first time since I walked out, I felt lighter. Linda called again. And again. I let the phone ring every time. She left one voicemail, her voice clipped, irritated, like I was the one being unreasonable. Mike, this is ridiculous. You need to come home so we can talk. You're acting like a child. Call me back. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Then, nothing. Silence. She was waiting, calculating, trying to figure out what move to play next. She didn't understand yet. There were no more moves. No more games. No more us. I was gone. The divorce moved fast. Eric didn't waste time, and neither did I. Linda was served with the papers 2 days later. Jason was there when I got the notification. He had just come home from work, tossing his keys onto the counter, when he saw me checking my phone. She got them? He asked. I nodded. He let out a slow whistle. Bet she wasn't expecting that. No, she wasn't. She thought she had control, that I'd come crawling back, that she could talk her way out of this. But now it was real. She called again that night. I didn't answer. This time she left a different kind of voicemail. Mike, please, can we talk? This doesn't have to be ugly. Ugly? Like standing in our kitchen, smirking at me when I found another man's belt on the floor? Like rolling her eyes when I packed my bags? Like telling me she wanted freedom and expecting me to just wait for her to get bored and come back? No. I deleted the voicemail. Days passed. Then a week. Linda sent texts. Not begging ones. Not emotional ones. Just probing. Are you seriously doing this? This is a huge mistake, Mike. We should at least talk about the house. I ignored all of them. Jason saw me glance at my phone one night and scoffed. She's still trying? Yep. He shook his head. You know what's funny? She really thought she could get away with it. Like you were just supposed to roll over and take it. I didn't answer. Because he was right. Linda had never thought I'd leave. She thought I'd get angry, sure. Maybe yell. Maybe sleep on the couch for a few nights. But in the end, she thought I'd stay. Because that's what I always did. I was the stable one. The reliable one. I was the man who never walked away. Until I did. The last time I heard from her was 3 weeks after she was served. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a text. It was an email. Like a damn business proposal. Mike, I don't know why you're doing this. We've built a life together. You're throwing it all away over one mistake. I don't understand why you won't even give me the chance to explain. I never meant to hurt you. We can work this out. We don't have to go through with this. Call me. I read it once. Then again. Then one last time. And I realized something. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even taking responsibility. She was just trying to stop the consequences. Not because she loved me. Not because she missed me. But because she didn't think this was supposed to happen to her. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Then, without hesitation, I replied, Linda, you wanted freedom. So I let you go. Now you want to come back. But I've moved on. Freedom had a price, losing me forever. Enjoy it. I hit send. Then I blocked her email. And just like that, she was gone. It's been months now. I have my own place. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Jason still checks in on me even though he doesn't need to. He doesn't talk to Linda much anymore. Says he doesn't trust her the same way. I don't tell him how much that means to me. But he knows. I won't lie and say it was easy. That there weren't nights where I laid awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell we got here. 30 years. 30 years. And in the end, all it took was one belt on the floor to unravel everything. But here's the thing, I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm free too. And unlike Linda, I don't regret it.